Hey guys, it's Julian McKenzie here of the Chris Johnston Show, letting you know that the SDPN will be participating in the Get Real Virtual 5K fundraiser to support Rainbow Railroad. Rainbow Railroad is a Canadian charitable organization that helps lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer individuals escape violence and persecution in their home countries. So your donations will create a maximum amount of impact for queer folks globally. On Friday, June 27th, we encourage you to go out and run, walk, or ride on anything that has wheels. Bikes, skateboards, scooters, rollerblades, skates, you name it. You could even push a stroller. Get creative and keep it accessible to you. You can even connect with other participants around the world by sharing a photo of yourself with the hashtag GetReal5K or Rainbow Road 5K, and great posts may be shared by Get Real on social media. If you want to contribute to either the SDPN page or Steve Dangle's own personal donation page, the links are in the description. Our team fundraising goal is $4,000, and we need your help to get there. Links in the description, and we hope you're able to support us as we do the Get Real Virtual 5K fundraiser. Thanks so much.
The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
Florida and Edmonton again in the Stanley Cup Final. That begins on the 4th, Wednesday. How excited are you for the matchup?
Really pumped. I think getting the same matchup again, I actually believe elevates the Cup Final a little bit. I think that there's sort of a familiar feel to it. Obviously, the teams have a little less feeling out. In this particular case, I mean, it was a pretty epic final they played last year, and I think both teams have actually improved in the calendar year just with some of the acquisitions they have. For me, watching the Oilers play defensively, you know, I think as a team, it's not necessarily just pointing to one acquisition, but it feels as though they've really gone to another level there. It seems to me that the Oilers have a path to winning this thing that isn't just kind of through McDavid and Draisaitl going, you know, superhuman. Now that might happen, of course, but I do think that we've seen a little more through them from their team game this playoffs, that they can win on nights where those guys aren't necessarily singular forces or double forces or however you want to call that. Obviously, what Florida's done has been remarkable. You know, really marched through these playoffs pretty unscathed, and they've reached it for a third straight year. And so you add all that together, you add in the fact that, you know, Connor McDavid's chasing his first Stanley Cup, which of course he was a year ago as well. But I just think that the hype is going to be pretty high. And, you know, for Edmonton starting the games on home ice, weirdly, their first series of this playoffs, they're starting on home ice, is in the 4th round. But, you know, perhaps that could give them a little bit of an edge, because certainly, you know, I know they lost game 3 at home last year to go down 3-0, but the games in Edmonton really stood out to me last year, just in terms of the energy around the city and the building. And, you know, they had a pretty one-sided win there too. Just have to believe that, you know, playing in front of their own fans, well, I think sometimes in hockey doesn't necessarily translate to real measurable advantage. I think there'll be some advantage there for the Oilers, and I have no idea who's going to win it. I mean, I'm picking Edmonton, but I'm picking Edmonton in Game 7 in double overtime. So I don't think it's going to. I don't see a decided edge one way or the other. But what I do think is that there's going to be an undeniable aspect to the top players on that team, and I just think they're playing even better than they were a year ago, and they got to a 2-1 loss in Game 7. So, you know, I'm factoring that into them just pulling it out narrowly this time around, but we'll have to see what happens.
I love your chaos option for Game 7. Double overtime in Edmonton, fate of the hockey world on the line, Edmonton winning it. I love it. I love it. Sign me up for that if that's how the Cup Final ends.
Well, it's one of the few things that I haven't seen in all the years I've been lucky enough to go to the Cup Finals. I haven't seen a Game 7 that went to overtime. Covered a number of Game 7s, a number of close games, you know. But, you know, something about the idea of overtime in Game 7 is just, it feels like it would mix together everything that can be great about playoff hockey, and you know, it'd be pretty. I just can't imagine the feeling of being in a building like that, because overtime in the playoffs is always crazy, no matter where you are. But, you couldn't imagine higher stakes than that if we get to June 20th and that's the outcome. So, as you know, Julian, I'm not huge on predictions in general. So that's where I'm landing. I did one for Per Bjurman, who, covers the NHL for the Swedish paper Aftonbladet. And every year he gets like 300 people who give him a prediction for the series, like players, active players. Like he does a really nice job. I have to translate it, of course, to read it. But he asked me for my prediction, and I said Game 7, double overtime. So I'm sticking with it here on the CJ show as well.
I wasn't even going to ask you for your prediction because I know how much you hate predictions. So I was very surprised when you were open with it off the jump.
I always wanted to get the jump on you. You know what I mean? Like I figured it was out there somewhere. So I'm like, all right, I'm just going to go there.
I like that we thought ahead here. Honest question. Go back to the final month of the regular season. How did you like the chances for the playoffs for Florida and Edmonton, considering where they were at in the standings? Vegas won the Pacific Division. People were thinking maybe this would have been the year the Los Angeles Kings would have gotten the one up on Edmonton. And then Florida just looked sluggish and banged up in that final month of the year. Honest to God, how did you like their chances in the last month of the year?
I probably wouldn't have favored this matchup. I think I was definitely more focused on the Central teams, like who's going to come out of that sort of Dallas, Colorado, Winnipeg mix. Obviously, it ended up being Dallas, and they lost in the conference final to Edmonton. But I was thinking that the team that emerged there, whether it was Colorado or Dallas, was probably going to be a stronger option potentially to get to the Cup final. Again, this is before the playoffs got rolling. I mean, the other thing with Edmonton is they got Trent Frederick before the deadline. He was injured the whole, basically the entire time. Hasn't really got up to speed until during these playoffs. Evander Kane didn't play until Game 3 of the playoffs after, since last year's Cup final. John Klingberg didn't play at the level he's playing for Edmonton during the regular season after he signed there following his hip surgery. So, I mean, the Oilers are a team in particular that have gotten better and better and better, I think, through just getting healthier and getting some of these guys back in and finding the right way to play with them. So, some of that I don't think you could have foresaw. I mean, usually when you're welcoming players into your lineup that late in the season, essentially, like there's a lot of unpredictability. I think probably the more likely outcome at times with players in those situations, they just never get the chance to find themselves. But, Edmonton's done it, and so give them credit. Florida was a harder read for me because I love their team. We've seen what they've done the previous 2 years. But, sometimes you get a little swayed by something you witness or hear firsthand. Florida came to Toronto, I believe it was April 1st or 2nd. It was, anyway, a couple weeks left in the season. At that time, the Panthers and Leafs were jockeying for position a little bit in the Atlantic Division. Paul Maurice gave an interview. It was one of those times, Julian, where he was available at like 4:45 right before 7 o'clock game. So like really close to puck drop. And someone asked him about some of the losses his team had endured. And he's like, yeah, at this time of year, we're just getting through it. Like, and it just seemed, it was very stark to hear him be that honest, quite honest. Like he basically was like, I'm paraphrasing, but like his attitude and basically what he was saying was, we just have to get through these last 10 games and then we'll see where we are in the playoffs. And so it didn't exactly, standing there that night, I didn't think like, oh, wow, like they're not going in on a high here. Right. And obviously they rested and had some injuries to like Barkov and Reinhardt and a bunch of other guys down the stretch. And you just, again, I just wondered, is the team going to ever find itself at the right time? And knowing they were going into a first round, ultimately ended up being with Tampa. It's a long way of saying I didn't doubt the team makeup or that they could go on a run like this. It didn't feel real good even into early April. And then, of course, they start with the Lightning. They dispatch them in 5 games, fall behind Toronto, roar back and win that series. And and now it's just like, of course, they just look like the Panthers. Anyway, it's been I don't even know what the lesson is there, if you know what I'm saying. I mean, obviously, there's definitely teams. Like the regular season doesn't mean that much, especially for teams, I think, that are veteran and that have been there, that know what it takes. Like a team, obviously, both of these teams understood how long what it feels like to play 99, 100 games, which is basically about where they're getting to, 97, 98, 99 games right now at the start of a cup final. So to play over 100, once you factor in whatever they end up playing in that final series, I think that there can be a little bit more pacing. If I love my distance running. If you think of it like a distance runner, there's not a whole lot to be gained in the first half of the race. You can only do something wrong if you go too fast. And so, I do think that there's an element of that here. And then obviously, like hockey still has a little bit of like you would rather be playing well entering the playoffs, but there's still like a little bit of who knows how it's going to happen, right? And there's also aspects of, Edmonton nearly went down 3-0 to LA. Like they didn't play that great in the game 3 that they won. They won it, obviously. I'm not trying to take anything away from them, but like if they lose that game, maybe like can they come back from 0-3? Sure, but the margin for error goes so small. At least Florida won the game 7 against Toronto in a blowout fashion, 6-1, but they still were in a game 7. Sometimes you get to a game 7, you can play well and lose. I guess my point is there's not a lot of certainty anywhere, but there's definitely not certainty on a hockey sheet. And yet here we are with the same 2 teams. So obviously they're doing something right after 360 odd days.
I wonder how much sleep Jim Hiller and Quentin Byfield have had these last couple of weeks, considering how that first round series went and the coach challenge and the failed clearance and how that ultimately led to Edmonton turning their series around and winning it, and that they're on the run they're on now.
Yeah, those have to be lessons, right? Like, I think that's the only way to do it. Anyone who's been in the sport long enough, I feel like makes peace with this to some degree. Like, it can be harder on the outside as a fan, for example, or even as a reporter. Like, sometimes you're like, how do you deal with that? But I think for the most part, this is kind of built it. It's like baked into like what it is to play hockey. Is that you can only control so much, right? And sometimes things happen. With those decisions, like clearly the challenge, like that has to be a process thing that the Kings look at as a coaching staff to make sure when they get to a big moment again, which is probably going to happen. I think they'll be a good team next year. How do we do that? How do we make that decision? What can we learn from the situation? With Byfield, obviously still a player, he's taken some big steps, but he's still learning in his career. I think that's a very teachable moment. I do believe there's something to having to learn how to play in the playoffs in particular. It just feels like any small mistake, like we're not even talking about the obvious ones, like throw a pizza up the middle. that happens throughout the season, and obviously you get burned for that. But in the playoffs, it can be just the matter of inches, like small decision making, a moment where you maybe lose focus, and all of a sudden the puck's in the net, and every goal is so huge. So I'm sure they're sleeping okay, but hopefully it's fuel for them. And I'm sure there's a bunch of other teams, whether it's Carolina, the way they went out, even the Leafs in the second round losing to Florida. If you're Toronto, you have to look at this, and I know you can't, like, none of us can sit here with certainty, but you must be saying like, wow, we could be in the Cup final. For all kinds of reasons. I think they let Florida off the hook a little bit in that series. They themselves could have very conceivably and easily been up 3-0. And again, even as great as Florida is, it's tough to win 4 in a row against a good opponent. So, go down the list. Dallas, after the way they just lost to Edmonton. Like there's a lot of teams that probably rightfully don't feel that far off, and they might not be that far off. Remember, it wasn't that long ago. 4 years ago, Florida won the President's Trophy and kind of got run over in the playoffs a little bit. And they had to do some soul searching. Obviously, they made some big decisions. They changed the coach, changed some key personnel, and then they've built themselves into this. It tends to be, for the teams that win, a very much a multi-year process of sort of recalibrating, learning some things, taking another run at it, and getting it right. And unfortunately, only one team can get it right each year.
Yep. I want to go back to the Oilers and specifically Connor McDavid. I'm sure you've seen this before. Wayne Gretzky losing a Cup final in his first attempt, and then the next year comes back, wins in a rematch. Sidney Crosby loses a Cup final in his first attempt, comes back the next year in a rematch. There's an opportunity for 97 to emulate what 99 and 87 have done. I think it's such a cool coincidence. And if the Oilers pull this off, I would be so excited for that to come true for 97.
Yeah, look, some of this is just narrative, right? Like, it's us applying a story over those facts and trying to make sense of it. Now, that being said, I do believe there's something to it. Not that you have to lose before winning, because, some players, Alex Ovechkin's been to one Stanley Cup final with Washington and they won it. And there are other examples, of course, too. But, it just feels like hockey's the ultimate team game. But every once in a while, there's players that are so good they can almost like move the solar system, right? And the names you mentioned in their primes, that's kind of what they've been. And it feels like the will of that one or two players can really change things. And, in Crosby's case, like he went home and had the picture of their bench after they lost what was Game 6 of the 2008 final, the night that Detroit won the Cup. Back at the old Igloo. I remember being there that night, pretty fondly, pretty crazy celebration the Red Wings had in the tiny visiting dressing room there. But Crosby put that picture of the bench like in his gym that summer and wanted to like focus on that feeling and not having it be replicated. And look, it took them all the way to, I think it was a 2-1 final in Game 7 of that series. They went down 2-0 in that series. They lost Game 5 to go down 3-2 in that series. Like it still could have not gone their way, but he and his teammates found a way. The Gretzky examples, that's probably one of the famous ones because Gretzky and his Oilers teammates talked about that idea of seeing how banged up the Islanders were after their first loss to them in '83 in the final. And then, sort of understanding that they didn't quite empty the tanks to the degree that's needed to hoist the thing. And then, of course, Edmonton went on a winning spree, 84, 85, 87, 88, and then even after Gretzky left, they won in 1990 again. They became the absolute winners of the decade, and they were a team that found a way that they couldn't be denied. It's like something clicked, and he was at the heart of that. I don't know what's going to happen with Edmonton, right? Like I just told you, I would predict they're going to win, but just because this has happened before doesn't guarantee it again. I think that's part of what makes this so fascinating, and no matter which way it goes, if Edmonton gets behind the series, we know they can rally. They've done it before, both in this playoffs, but last year in the final against Florida after going down 3-0. But if they get ahead, like how do they deal with that? And can they find a way to take some life out of the Panthers? Because the Panthers have this quality where I feel like they're a team that really doesn't go away. You know what I mean? Like bad stuff happens and they're relentless. I mean, and I think they understand what it takes and they have a lot of confidence in themselves. They've earned that confidence with all the success they've had. And so, I think it's going to be a tug of war series myself. We had 2 3-game winning streaks in the last series between them. I'm going to go on a limb and say you're not going to see that again either way. And, that's why I think it's going 7. You've got Connor McDavid, but this is a team game still. There's a lot going on. We'll see how Stuart Skinner, hangs in there. I mean, it's been lots of really good and some pretty bad in this playoffs. It's been more good than bad of late. Unfortunate for the Oilers that Zach Hyman's out of the picture for the final, just because I think he's a pretty important culture guy, plus just, really solid top 6, win puck battles, emotional leader, score a big goal kind of guy. But I'm sure the Panthers players, even the ones that are dressing, aren't all 100% either. And so, can't wait to see the puck actually get dropped here on Wednesday and go at it.
Me neither. To your point about Florida being inevitable, you can point to literally every round in the playoffs and that attribute of their game just showing up. Like the fact that they went into a series against Tampa, and Tampa was so good throughout the regular season. We were just talking about how Florida looked in the last part of the year, and they end up walloping them. We talked about how they looked down against the Toronto Maple Leafs. They woke up and they go on to win the series. You can go back to that Carolina series where, they came out to a real big lead, and Carolina tried to make a series of it in their final game of that series, only for Florida to wake up at the very end and then clinch it. Like, they're favored in this series for a reason. And while I'm with you, I kind of want to see Edmonton win. They're so good up and down their lineup, all the tweaks they've made to make themselves the contender that they are. It wouldn't surprise me if this Panthers team wins it in 6 or 7. I could see it going to a 7, as you've said, but you're right. There's just something about this team where even if you think they're down and out, they just wake up and they're inevitable. Inevitable is the word I'm using for this team throughout this spring.
Well, here's something to watch, I'd say, is that Edmonton was basically ahead the entire Western Conference Final, right? Like even game one, which they lost, they had a lead going into the third period. The Stars roared back and won that series. But Edmonton was able to play things on their own terms because of how often they were ahead in those games. And even on the periods where the Stars outplayed them in that series, like it still felt like it was Edmonton's game. I think Florida is a different team when they have a lead than when they don't. When they have a lead, they're just so good at really not giving you a whole lot, playing in a manner that isn't too risky by any stretches. I mean, what was interesting is the Leafs kind of exposed them a little bit with their style of play because Florida's defense will come in, pretty aggressively in the play. It's part of how they forecheck and how they apply pressure, especially when they go in the offensive zone. And there can be opportunities to spring an odd man rush or breakaway the other way if you counterattack it. And I wonder if a team like Edmonton, with some of the speed it has, I think of even guys like Kasperi Kapanen, playing up higher in the lineup now, if they start looking for opportunities to do that, because if Edmonton can get ahead in these games, and I just mean getting a 1-0 lead, I think eventually Florida is going to have to, go on the press a little bit more, and there might be some more chances going the other way. Just kind of no style is perfect, right? Or no style can't be countered in some way. The Panthers are such good forechecking team, though. Like when they have the lead, I think they just suffocate the opposition. They outnumber you everywhere on the ice, and they just make it really hard for you to go through essentially the waves of players that they're throwing at you. So, I think weirdly the team that's kind of like old school a little bit, but the team that scores first in these games more often probably has a better chance of success. Which again might sound probably statistically that's always the case, but I think especially with the way these two teams play, might be even more so. And so, that's where I think home ice can be huge for the Oilers because most teams when they play at home, maybe that wave only lasts 5 minutes out of the gate, 7 minutes, 8 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it is. But usually there is a wave of emotion and kind of, generally speaking, the home team starts to dictate the terms. Again, when you're up against a team like the Panthers that have played everywhere, that have won everywhere, like I'm not saying that they'll back down, but there might be some opportunity there if Edmonton could get some early goals in these games. I think that's probably their best path to success, but there's no easy path to success. I mean, Bobrovsky's been solid throughout the playoffs. The Panthers know exactly who they are, what they are. That's where their inevitability comes from that you're referencing, is they just know. I don't think that there's any doubt. I don't think there's any questions like how should we be playing in this moment. I think even when they know, they've got into such a point of repetition and where they're getting great feedback in terms of wins that I just think that they know exactly how they're going to want to play, and it's up to the Oilers to find a way to beat that.
Yeah, if the Panthers smother the Oilers like they did against the Leafs, when we remember, and they smother that supporting cast that I think has shown itself really well for the Oilers throughout the playoffs, they win this series. Like, you can only hope to contain 97, 29, obviously, and Leon Draisaitl is going to play well too. But one big reason why the Oilers have been successful is because of the goal scoring they've gotten from guys like Evander Kane throughout this postseason. They're going to miss Zach Hyman throughout this final, but if the Panthers shut down obviously their top players and their supporting cast, they have this in the bag.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I'll say this too, watching Edmonton win in Dallas, it was amazing how businesslike it had become the second time around. I think that's part of it when you ask about sort of the Crosby and Gretzky experience. Like, I just think the first time you go through anything, naturally, you're probably going to ride more of a roller coaster of emotions. You're excited, you're feeling everything, your brain's probably going 100 miles a minute at times. It just felt like Edmonton knows its business now too. And so that's ultimately, to go back to the whole start of this, that's why I'm so excited. I think it's cool to have back-to-back rematches because it's just a unique dynamic. And it did happen, in 08 and 09? And then before that was at the 80s. I can't remember. I should know all this off the top of my head, but point is it doesn't happen that often. That's all I'm getting at. Like, you can't, especially in a 32 team league, and there's lots of good teams and lots of things can happen. This is pretty unique to see. And so, it's, I think it's going to be even a better series than last year. And last year was pretty epic.
I'm looking forward to that if that's the case. We should go back to the Western Conference Final. And I know we've spent a lot of time on Edmonton, but we should focus on Dallas. Obviously, a disappointing end to their season, but a lot of talk about how it ended for Jake Oettinger and head coach Pete DeBoer. Jake Oettinger allowing 2 goals on 2 shots in Game 5. He gets pulled for Casey DeSmith, and you could feel the tension between the head coach and the goaltender. And to read the quote gone around the world from Pete DeBoer about Jake Oettinger, I don't blame it all on Jake, but the reality is, if you go back to last year's playoffs, he's lost 6 or 7 games to Edmonton, and we give up 2 goals on 2 shots in an elimination game. That's a pretty big sample size. And even after that, Pete DeBoer acknowledging that he didn't really get to talk to Jake after that happened. Like, just that relationship, at least publicly, that doesn't look like a great situation. How do you think this plays out between the Dallas number 1 goaltender and their head coach?
Well, I love the honesty, honestly. Like, I feel like what you got from Pete DeBoer there is a whole lot of honesty about why he made the call, you know, what was going through his mind. And really, you know, this is the Stars are a team, like, they've been to 3 straight conference finals, right? Like, they have been knocking at the door, and, you know, they need to find a way to take that really one next big step to at least get to the cup final. And you have a veteran coach, and, you know, Jake Oettinger is not a young goalie at this stage of his career. So it's definitely, I'd say it's on the harsher side of how we tend to see players, especially star players, treated in that moment. But I don't think this is the time for kid gloves for that team. It's an older team. They don't have a lot of time, and I'm okay with the honesty. Now, I don't know what has to happen from now in terms of basically what I'll call adult conversations to make sure everyone's on the same page moving forward. But, you know, the one thing Pete DeBoer said as well when he met the reporters a few days after basically their locker cleanout day is he said, look, I felt like in that moment I had to make a bold call to try to basically wake our team up. He said, if we came back and won that game, you'd all be saying what a great move I made, and we'd be playing tonight in Edmonton. And he said, and I realized when it doesn't work and when it goes wrong as it did, I've got to stand up here and answer these questions as well. Like he wasn't, I didn't take any of that as testy. He was just saying, basically, he's got to live with making those hard calls every once in a while and being questioned about it. And so, you know, obviously I stood up and took notice watching that game. Even the way he pulled him, right? He has the timeout, and then you got Oettinger going back towards his crease, and then obviously yells something to pull him out of the game. And then, you know, there's a lot of discussion on the broadcast. So maybe he's going to go back in for the second period, and kind of coach ices him walking by. Clearly that wasn't part of the problem. I mean, look, it was harsh, but I feel like I'm okay with that given where that team's at, how many big games they've been in, how really they haven't been able to get over the hump. And look, at the end of the day, Jake Oettinger is going to outlast Pete DeBoer in Dallas. He's got an 8-year contract kicking in. So unless they go and win the next 3 Stanley Cups and Pete works there until he's 85, you know, more than likely the player is going to outlast the coach on this one. But I don't mind the coach taking a bit of a Hail Mary. You know, I'd love to know a week later, like, you know, whenever the dust truly settles, like, does he regret it? Not because of where the relationship may or may not sit or anything like that, but does he look back on it like having Casey DeSmith in for whatever ended up being 50 odd minutes of that game, a little bit more, ended up not giving his team the best chance to win, like, ultimately. But I don't mind it. We always want more honesty. What I saw there was a lot of honesty. And again, it's not like a rookie. I don't feel like he's bullying him or anything. Like, you know what I mean? Like, to me, it ended up being the wrong call, but at least he has given you, and all of us, I mean, but he's given everyone exactly what he was thinking. And you can say, like, oh, you really screwed up, bud. But I mean, he went for a Hail Mary and he just didn't complete the pass. That's how I see it.
Like, I appreciate the honesty. I just wouldn't have done that call. And I get that we have the benefit of hindsight here. Even in the moment, I wouldn't have done that. If I look at this series, I get Jake Oettinger entering that game 7. Maybe you want a little bit better goaltending from him. I don't think it was the main problem. you're looking at those games leading up to it, you're getting barely anything from your offensive production. Mikko Rantanen, his scoring dried up. Jason Robertson showing up maybe a little too late in this series. You've probably seen the stat of Wyatt Johnston's plus minus throughout this postseason. There's so many other people on the Dallas Stars I'm looking at before I look at Jake Oettinger. And for that to unravel the way that it did, like, I don't know. I don't like it for Jake Oettinger personally.
That's fair. I mean, it's pretty clear he's doing it trying to spark a response from the other players. It's old school. It's probably not, I don't know, maybe that idea will go right out the window as time goes along, and that just won't be what coaches do. Jake Oettinger is not a goalie that gets pulled a lot in general. I know he'd been pulled prior in the playoffs. But obviously he's a pretty top goaltender in the league. That's why he got that 8-year contract. That's why everyone was writing all these columns about him being Team USA starter at the Olympics, which I always thought were premature, not as a comment on Jake Oettinger, but just because that decision doesn't need to be made. I mean, there were those columns when Jeremy Swayman just won the Worlds for Team USA with a shutout in the gold medal game. I mean, maybe everyone should be right how Swayman should start the next big game for Team USA. Anyway, I'm just having fun at some of our colleagues, but
you should write that column. You should just go all the way in and just write it. You write it.
I'm not getting involved because I would be a hypocrite then, because it's still too early to say one way or another. Frankly, what it tells me is between seeing Hellebuck's ups and downs, seeing Ottinger's ups and downs, and then seeing Swayman after what was an up and down season finish on such a strong note, I'd say it's still a jump ball about who actually starts the biggest game or even the first game for Team USA at the Milan Olympics. The good news is they have lots of good choices. But the truth is I don't think any of us can say with certainty today who it's going to be that gets that start.
Okay. I'll leave an Olympics question that I had just come to mind for our summer episodes. What I love about doing these shows with you is we get so much content in my head that can work for the summer surprise episodes, which we will have throughout the summer, of course.
Dude, we're almost at summer. It feels like seeing the calendar turn to June 1st. It feels like it's like the sprint to summer. Like this is going to be such an awesome month between free agency, starting at the end of the month, but obviously you got buyouts, you got, RFAs get their qualifying offers. We might have an offer sheet come July 1st. Then you have the Cup Final. There's a draft squeezed in there that obviously is going to look a little different and feel a little different this time around. I just feel like, and quite honestly, we haven't got to it. I know I mentioned at the end of one of that, like we're also going to have a CBA extension, and I'm almost certain that will be announced at some point this month. In fact, it could be this week. From what I'm hearing, it's that close. So, there's a lot going on in the sport, and this is just like a month of delightful chaos, and then we'll get some R&R in the summer months beyond it.
And for Dallas, like they have to be part of the interesting conversations to be had with all these teams from now to July 1st and beyond, right? They're not going to have that much in terms of cap space. They have a handful of guys who are going to be UFAs, including Jamie Benn and Matt Duchene. I'm very curious to know what the Dallas Stars are going to look like entering next season, considering the guys who are set to leave.
Yeah, I mean, look, they have the extensions kicking in for Rantanen, Wyatt Johnston. I mean, they've spent their money essentially. I mean, look, perhaps they look at some kind of trading out of salary. Someone who's relatively established on the roster as a way to give them more flexibility and see if they can address the team that way. But there's not a lot of room to maneuver. And some of those guys, Jamie Benn, those guys are getting older too. I suppose the good news there is he's not going to cost what he was costing for all these years because the price tag's going down. So it doesn't mean that we should write the end of his time exactly in Dallas just yet. But you're right; it's a transitionary summer, and they're one of the very few teams that are not fully capped out because no one's capped out yet. But they don't have the space to be big players without making some other adjoining moves in order to create it. And so Jim Nill is consistently viewed as one of the best GMs in the league, if not the best. And so it's a little soon maybe to say what he's going to do, but it wouldn't surprise me if he's got a few aces up his sleeve. But you get to 3 straight conference finals, that's pretty special territory in its own right, but it's the territory no one wants to be in because you start to wonder, are they going to be this decade's, San Jose Sharks or, a team that's been truly great for a long time and had all kinds of success, just not the ultimate success. they've still got a little time to push back against that window, but every year that passes and your core gets a little older, it gets tougher to get the job done.
Let me ask about another conference finalist and what could be next for them. Carolina. Florida made quick work of them in a gentlemanly sweep. What's next for them and the composition of their team? And Eric Tulsky, we saw his tweets from a couple days ago just thanking fans for the year that was. But they need to find a way to get over the hump too.
They do, but I'd say I'd be pretty excited as a Hurricanes fan because that organization, more than most others that have been a top team, like they're not afraid of change, right? Like they let a lot of players walk away as free agents last summer rather than, perhaps pay them at a level they weren't comfortable with for whatever reason. The whole Mikko Rantanen thing, like I think some people were using it to dunk on the Hurricanes at times during the year. I never understood that. I mean, to me, it's like they went all in on a guy. They didn't get him to sign but they at least had that exclusive window to try to do so. And then they flipped him and did really well on the accompanying trade. Like, I don't see how that, like, to me, I don't see how that's an example of like more and more teams should be operating that way. It's almost like they're thinking 2 or 3 moves down the road instead of just like what's directly in front of you. So I think the Hurricanes are going to have a bold offseason. They do have cap space, different circumstances than what the Stars face. And would not surprise me in the least when we start talking about the Mitch Marner situation with a little more urgency as we get closer to July 1st, if they're a team that's in on Marner. I do think that they feel that they'd like to have more of a superstar presence in that lineup. That's what Rantanen represented for them in the 6 weeks they had him on the roster. I know it didn't go great in that 6 weeks period. It was kind of a strange time, the 4 Nations break, but that was the ethos behind the decision. And, I think that they're going to go out and try to, in any way they can do so, bring in that kind of force to their team. And that makes a whole lot of sense. We know they tried to trade for Marner, for example, already once. He blocked the move at the time, or he didn't consent to waiving his no movement clause. But I think it's a totally different proposition in free agency, depending on where the numbers get to, too, right? I mean, to me, one of the interesting things about the Marner situation is, some of the we'll call them more obvious teams that tend to attract free agents. I don't think that those teams are going to be as incentivized to go financially where some other teams might for Mitch Marner, and so perhaps a team like Carolina, maybe it's Chicago. I'm not sure if Utah is going to get involved there, but maybe if Utah wants to step up, like they might be able to take the numbers to a different level for Marner and give him something to think about. And, my understanding of how Marner is viewing this is he and his camp, they want to see what's out there. Like, I think that I don't think that there's a whole lot of like automatic no's, in terms of like where their thinking's at. I think that they want to approach this with open minds and see what's possible. And so, I don't mean to say that it's only Mitch Marner or bust for the Hurricanes. I just think that any top quality player that's available in any way, shape, or form, Marner's the one in free agency that's pretty apparent. But, we'll see what the trade market yields. I think Carolina will be knocking on all those doors and considering those options. And as I say, I think they're a pretty fearless front office. And, Eric Tulsky's made no secret of the fact that just because maybe the Rantanen thing didn't turn out exactly as he might have hoped back in January, it's not going to dissuade him from taking big cuts in the batter's box. And so when we talk about interesting teams this offseason, I think Carolina has to be pretty high on any list of organizations we might rank in that regard.
As we transition into Ask CJ, as we're talking about Mitch Marner and potential destinations for him, T.A. Neiman asks, has Chris heard anything out of Vegas? I know people keep talking about Marner, but there have to be major moves to fit him. Just curious if there are any movements coming with VGK.
I think the Marner Vegas talk is a little overblown. Look, you can never take Vegas out of any major sweepstakes because of the DNA of the franchise and the obviously the history of moves that we can point to. But when I look at this free agent class, I think it's more likely we see Vegas land a Sam Bennett than a Mitch Marner. I think that he's a little bit more up their alley. And, he's not going to come cheap by any means. I think that you're looking at a different level of contract to get Bennett there. It's not to say that Vegas don't like Marner. I think, frankly, there's 32 teams in the league that like Mitch Marner, in terms of they see what he can do on the ice. Affects you of both ends in terms of being a top defensive player, but also had 102 points this year. I mean, it's not a question of liking or not. It's how motivated are you going to be to stretch to make it happen? And right now the Golden Knights don't have a lot of cap space, which again hasn't worked against them in the past. I just think that somehow there seems to be this notion that they're like the favorites. I wouldn't call them the favorites to land Mitch Marner. It's probably almost a little too soon to be ranking the likelihood of any team, but I do think that the Golden Knights, if Sam Bennett gets to free agency, who's number 2 on the free agent board that's dropping on Tuesday at The Athletic, if anyone wants to check that out. I've compiled it over the weekend, but I think Vegas might be swinging harder for number 2 than number 1 if both of those players end up going free.
Stay tuned for CJ's insights on his free agent board on the next edition of the CJ Show. Next question from Talon Jenkins. Lane Hutson contract predictions.
Well, great story by Arpon Basu at The Athletic, our colleague, really diving into the various layers of this onion in terms of how it goes. Basically, for those who aren't up to speed on it, Hutson, while only playing one full season in the NHL this year, likely going to win the Calder Trophy for that season, was a historically high amount of points for a defenseman, I think top 3 all time in his first NHL season, is eligible to sign an extension a year out as of July 1st. And I think the question becomes, what makes sense for the team? What makes sense for the player in this case? And we've seen the Canadians in the past with Juraj Slafkovsky, Caden Gooley as well, I believe, both signed their second NHL contracts with, basically a year before their entry-level deals expired. So we've seen the Canadians act quickly in the past to get ahead of this sort of thing. And, I believe Montreal will at least have those exploratory conversations with, Lane Hutson's agent ahead of time just to see if there's something that can be done. But this isn't maybe the time for any player to be overstretching in the sense of security is always going to be appealing, right? And so there might be a number where it makes sense for Hutson to sign this summer, and maybe even a little bit less than what he could get if he waits. But, he wants to take, if he gets the Jake Sanderson contract, right? Something like 8 times 8, a little bit more than 8 million, but, ballpark 8 times 8, maybe that appeals to him. But, to me, there's no harm as a restricted free agent and playing out your second year, because if Lane Hutson has an offensive season like the one he just had, if he can replicate that, if he can get better in some areas, improve, whether it be his all-around play, maybe not have to start so many shifts in the offensive zone, which of course is the coach's discretion. But the reason the coach is doing that is, there's a certain methodology there. He could easily be a $10 million player on the next deal if that happens. Now, but there's risk. Maybe he has the sophomore slump kind of idea, right? Maybe he gets injured. I'm not trying to, but there's lots of things that when a player is sitting down and having these thoughts and conversations that you have to factor into it, right? There's certainly some degree of unpredictability out there. Look I'm talking about this like he's automatically signing a 7 or 8 year extension. I mean, there's also the option, which we've seen with Rasmus Dahlin, a whole bunch of other, really strong defensemen, Thomas Harley more recently in Dallas, signing a bridge deal that comes in much below these kind of numbers. And then, on his third contract is in a position to hit a ball into the upper deck and then some. So, I think the good news of your Hutson is really it's about what he's comfortable with. But I'll say this, if he signs a long-term extension this summer, a year out, it's probably because he and his camp are willing to not stretch for every dollar, maybe just, again, wanting that security, wanting to remove the questions, wanting to put some players like the carrot of a contract here, right? Like some people, I think, respond well to that. Other people, it almost debilitates them. It's just too much on their mind. Now, for Lane, this is the first time he's gone through this as a pro hockey player, so he might not even know which camp he falls in just yet. But, all of it, you put it all together, and I think there's not as much. I don't think this has to be a top priority for the Canadians this offseason. And I don't think it has to be for the player either, but you still have the talk just because maybe you're kind of both in the same ballpark and something can be done quickly and easily. And, on July 1st, that bit of business is done. And I mean, if it's a long-term deal, it could basically, he could sign away his 20s essentially at this point in time if he wanted to do an 8-year deal this summer. That's, and that's appealing to some guys because then they don't have to think about a contract ever again and they've got generational wealth coming their way.
Man, if only we could all be so lucky.
Well,
Jan Bulis.
I've never been as good at anything as Lane Hutson is at hockey. So
I don't know if this is the player. This is just some dude with a random Twitter account. But Jan Bulis wants to know where Matt Duchene will play in 2025, 2026.
I think he'd still like to play in Dallas. I think on some level there's some unfinished business there. Duchene's had 2 solid seasons with the Stars. I know this playoffs didn't go his way in terms of having as many goals as he would like. He did score a big one recently before the end of the season, but the numbers in the playoffs didn't shine and sparkle. But he had 2 pretty darn good regular seasons there, especially. And he's he played there on bargainy, I'd say below market contracts. He was able to do that because he was bought out by Nashville, so he still was getting paid by the Predators. But I think at this stage in Matt Duchene's career, trying to win a Stanley Cup is at the top of the list. In addition to the fact that I know he really likes living in Dallas, it's been great for his family. He loves playing for that team. So, at this point, and I don't think the air is fully cleared. After the smoke was fully cleared after the end of the Stars season. So there's probably not a lot of clarity on this just yet, but I think his preference would be try to go back. Now, as we mentioned earlier, the Stars don't have a ton of money. Is he willing to do a 3rd straight year where he's maybe signing less than market value, or would he rather test the open market? I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty though on the open market. You might make a decision that sounds good and it might not end up being such a good fit personally and professionally. And frankly, if the Stars and Duchene can find a way to extend their relationship, I mean, how many better places are there to win a cup? I mean, there might be a couple, but it's not a long list beyond Dallas. And so I think Matt understands he's in a great spot and he's going to see if he can stay there first before maybe expanding his horizons a little bit.
LD asks, Brian McClellan and Chris Patrick have mentioned the possibility of the Washington Capitals going for a big back. Could it be Marco Rossi, one of the big UFA wingers? I'm surprised big back was used as a term here, but they're curious about what the Caps are going to do in free agency.
It's like, how bad do I look if I ask you what big back means? So is there a definition that's easy for me here or what?
I know of big back as like if you're like a fat person or a big person, that's what they call you. That's what I know of. I have never heard of it in the context of what LD is bringing up here. I didn't know that's what was said. So, it's just funny to have to explain to you what a big back is, but now you know, apparently.
So it's sort of what I might guess. Big rump?
Yeah, just a big-bodied player, I guess.
Marco Rossi is a lot of things. He's not a big back. He's a little diminutive, I would say, for, that's part of, frankly, it's part of the reason why he's going to be available for trade is that, I think that there's debate about how effective, even though he had a 60-point season this year, someone like that, how effective they can be. Can they be your second line center on a team that goes to a cup final? All those things so I wouldn't think of him as a big back. I do think though, a team like Washington, I mean, look at their summer last year. They made some bold sort of trades, right? Like the Pierre-Luc Dubois move is probably the most obvious to point out, but they also got Jacob Chychrun via trade. I think that they've shown that they're willing to think outside the box and make some deals. So, they would be a team, the Capitals, I think that you could see getting involved in the trade market. Because the truth is, without spoiling the free agent board, that I'd love for you to go read, indulge, click on, consider all the possibilities for your team, your favorite team out there. It's not the deepest free agent class. Certainly when we're talking about truly sort of change the game type of players, there's some on that list, but it's not. You get into the teens and, again, some intriguing names, veteran guys. That's where you find Jonathan Taves and even Patrick Kane and Jamie Benn is somewhere around 20th. Like some guys who've had great careers and I think will be intriguing ads if they end up, going to free agency and landing in new cities. I mean, there'll be some of the buzzy things that happen on July 1st, 2nd, 3rd, but there's not that many players in their primes that truly change the makeup of your team. Now Marner would be one of the players I would classify that way. So for Washington, I just say watch the trade market. I don't know if you saw the stuff this week about the end of Alex Ovechkin's career potentially coming this season. Unfortunately, someone in the marketing department sent out an email that probably got themselves in some trouble there. But let's face it, the guy's he's past Wayne Gretzky's all-time goals record. He's 40, and he's got 1 year left on his contract. I'm not going to say it was a non-story because it certainly was a story. I don't think it's a surprise for anyone to learn that this is likely Ovechkin's last season. In fact, if anything, and I've alluded to on the show, there was some thought in pretty senior places around the NHL that this could be the season that just ended might end up being his last one. I mean, what's more notable, and Ovechkin made this clear before, going home for the summer, that he is going to be back to honor the last year of his contract. But, in Washington, they've transitioned nicely. They've done what a lot of teams like the Pittsburghs and even Chicago, they're where a lot of teams would love to be in terms of how they've integrated the next wave while still having some of their legacy players still there, like John Carlson, of course, and Ovechkin. This is probably the last kick at the can with Ovi, most likely. And so I think that will inform their summer as well. I think you're going to see them be pretty aggressive and see what they can get done on the trade market.
I got one more for you, if that's
chasing
okay.
The big backs.
Chasing big backs. I still can't believe we mentioned big back on this show. Kate S. wants to know if there is any update on the coaching search for the Pittsburgh Penguins.
It's winding down to the end days there in Pittsburgh. Kyle Dubas was at the World Hockey Championships, so he wasn't able to he did the first round of interviews remotely, Zoom or what have you. But has been back in Pittsburgh, had a chance to talk to a number of people. I know DJ Smith has been in the mix there, Jay Woodcroft, Dave Quinn. Wasn't prepared for this question, so I'm probably forgetting a name or two. Mitch Love, who was an assistant in Washington. He's been in the mix for that job, and ultimately we're getting down to decision time. It wouldn't surprise me if that came on Monday or Tuesday of this week, just because, time's a ticking here for teams to move forward. Boston's still working through its search, some crossover with some of those same names there, plus Marco Sturm, a former Bruins player, in the mix. But, we're slowly getting there with, Lane Lambert getting hired in Seattle. There's a lot of vacancies this summer and they're winding down. So I can't tell you which of those names I mentioned will get there. I mean, DJ Smith has a history with Kyle Dubas from, their time in Toronto together, with Smith being an assistant coach in that era. Mitch Love probably represents, he's certainly a coach that got a lot of interest this summer, including from the Kraken. In terms of as a younger up and comer, I think it works twofold. First off, he's worked alongside Spencer Carberry, who's probably the best recent example of a younger coach who got elevated and was ready for it and has taken the Capitals to another level, which is what's happened in his 2 years on the bench there. And then, Mitch Love is a similar age and experience level, made the jump from the Western League to the AHL to being on the NHL bench in Washington. And it's really a matter of when, not if, he gets the job. And so, maybe I think what the Pittsburgh wants to do is they want to find the coach to guide them into that next era, right? Because of where they're at as a team. And so maybe they end up going someone younger like him. But as I mentioned, I think we're going to find out here in the very near future. In fact, you might be listening to this and it might already be dated. We've had an announcement. That's how close I think it is.
I love you saying that you weren't prepared for this question, as if you ever prepare for Ask CJ, for one. Two, you still deliver a great answer for this anyway.
Thank you. It's just sometimes when it's like a list of 5 things and my brain's a bit scrambled, if I haven't, I can't ace every test without studying. And that was one I didn't study for properly. I find the coaching searches, it sounds weird. This is just maybe a window in how my brain works, but obviously I have a lot of conversations but you start to eventually, because there is crossover between the names. I get mixed up about what's going on where a little bit. Anyway, that time of year, man. I mean, the flip side, would I say it's the rush to the summer? I'm not functioning at exactly 100% efficiency up top here. It's been a long season.
I don't know. I think you've crushed through this postseason. This is as good as I've ever seen you, man. You're killing
wow. Well, I'm getting on a plane to Edmonton, and I'm going to really endeavor not to be one of the people complaining about the travel in this Cup final, because I am legit pumped about the series. But the grind really begins once we finish recording here, and I get on a plane.
And we'll be here all throughout the grind. Our next episode will break down what we saw from the opening game of this year's Stanley Cup Final, and so much other news and notes to go through in the world of the NHL. CJ, great work as always, my man.
Thank you. And hopefully we're talking about the new CBA by then. I'm telling you, it's coming. Gary Bettman due to speak and Bill Daly to reporters on Wednesday before game one of the final. I don't think we're getting the announcement there, but someone did tell me it's not impossible that it comes then. So, I mean, we're knocking at the door of what will be a pretty monumental moment for the sport when it happens. And the best thing I can tell you with certainty, the talks between the players union and the league went smoothly. And the only reason it becomes a matter of if or when, not if, that they got this deal done is a result of the fact they found, from what I've heard from multiple sources, basically a path where they're able to figure out how do we make the most money for each other to help each other out. They're not fighting about the existing pie the way they have at times in the past.
All right. And we'll break that down too once that's out there, of course, on the Chris Johnston Show. Thanks so much for listening, everyone.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.